Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm from Kazakhstan. I'm a bit nervous today because this is the first speaking opportunity for me here today. But it was here when back in 2013 when I learned about BIM, and since then I've been dealing with BIM more and more and learning about BIM more and more. I'd like to thank PSS Great Tech team first and its CEO Alexei Kukin for this kind invitation, for their fruitful partnership, and for their commitment to continue this event every year. My presentation is going to be about systemic classifier. This solution has been presented on several occasions before at this conference, and we are implementing it right now in Kazakhstan, and this is going to be the topic of my presentation. This is a timeline. What happened in Kazakhstan? It all happened in 2015 when our Institute of Construction decided to implement BIM solutions, and we had a roundtable discussion followed by a pilot project in Autodesk Revit in 2015 that was supported by Cratech company. And then we started analyzing best international practices, how the technology is being implemented. And this resulted in a concept in 2017 which described all the advantages of using this technology and stage-by-stage implementation plan. Then regulatory documentation, requirements, and last year we launched classifier adaptation initiative industry-wide. As for the concept, next year already complex design objects will use BIM technologies. We have little time before this deadline. We think that the industries that deal with complex design solutions and design objects are ready for it, and all we need to do is to implement BIM now. This is our regulatory framework. BIM in Kazakhstan is called TIMSO. It's similar. It's the same as building information modeling. It's a set of regulatory documents that allows you to co-work on a construction process together with all the stakeholders. There are some more general regulatory documents, and there are some documents that deal with specific aspects of BIM requirements. And since we are talking about regulatory framework, I'd like to show you this information model. You see here, in the middle of it, the focus of attention is the construction object itself. And BIM follows and supports the life cycle. It consists of electronic documents, electronic models, and other data. You see it has a certain reference to the relevant ISO standard, and part of it was borrowed from GOST, Russian GOST standard. And that was our goal, to marry innovations with existing practice, to use the terms and definitions such as drawings, electronic model, electronic document, data in one conceptual framework. Now, getting back to the usefulness and the practicability of this event. 3 years ago, our team heard the presentation of Mr. Aksamitas with great interest. He spoke about classification of different elements. It's available on YouTube. I highly recommend it. The presentation was about the standard ISO 12062, and it sets a higher level of object classification. It's a top level. It's a certain ontology that describes construction resources, construction processes, and construction results. Decomposes them, so to say. And construction result can be construction complex, construction object, or construction element. And the construction object consists of construction elements. So it's a certain hierarchy that makes it easy to understand what is what when you deal with classifiers and with regulatory documentation. Because if you have had a experience in dealing with regulatory development, you know that terms can be tricky. There may be different interpretations of a term, and you may easily get bogged down in discussing what a certain term means. This removes this problem. So, two standards, hierarchy and coding. Three aspects for description of an object: location aspect, product aspect, and functional aspect. What this certain element is for in a building. You have to do some preliminary groundwork first before you implement the classification system. That is why we studied best international practices within the framework of our working group in 2017, and same was carried out in Russia. Same work was done in Russia last year, and the results of these two studies show that the coding ISO 81346 is the best suited for the needs of our industry today. Everything is what is new is everything is something that is old but is well forgotten, as the Russian saying goes. And indeed, there are some references from the legacy systems in the coding systems. For instance, German Kraftwerk Kennzeichensystem, KKS. It has been in use in the Western industries for more than 25 years already. So, ISO IEC 81346 borrowed something from the legacy documents in terms of terms and in terms of operation, which is also important. Another important aspect is that the coding is very compact. It's brief. Let's take an example of an object in Uniclass 2015. There are 44 symbols to describe all the classes. ISO 81346 is more compact. Less symbols means better interface between a designer and information systems that he or she uses. Verification, modeling, operation, etc. Now, getting back to life cycle, concept of life cycle. It's split into BIM and, it can be split into PIM and AIM. Project information model and asset information model. And there are also some terms that are applied throughout the entire project cycle. Something is measured in meters, items, cubic meters. Everything is in reference materials, a huge volume of information. And it's easy to miss the point when you deal with so much detail. And that is the reason why some construction stakeholders think that their classifier is the most important one. Although even if you have a look at the entire life cycle of a project, that this classifier can be very insignificant. That is why we suggest to use as a foundation a systemic classifier, because there are less than 1,000 classes in it, and some people think that in order to start start speaking a certain language, you need to learn about 1,000 words. So if you learn 1,000 components, you will be able to deal with the system. Besides, if you specialize in, say, ventilation, you don't have to know everything. You have to know your part of the classifier, but you don't have to learn everything yourself. There is a portal that assembles all this information, and we have such portal in Kazakhstan. It has a regulatory classifier, and there are also other classification systems, and you can search for something. If you're not sure about certain class, you can look for it, make comments, and it's not just a reference. It's an integration platform. It's an integrator. That also supports plugin functionality. This is the example of our design office, KazNISA. That is classified in different systems: electric, ventilation, communication, lighting, etc. When we first showcased BIM technology to our business support division, they had a look at it and said, wow, wonderful, but didn't do anything about it. But when we started had a different approach, like there's a system, this system can be indexed in your database, even in Excel if you want. If you want to have a look how the system looks, you can you can use a viewer to see it. If you want to buy something, you just indicate the code, and your counterpart will know what this thing is for and where it belongs to. This is how it looks on practice. There's a certain room, a certain class attributed to this room. Even if somebody makes a mistake, say makes a typo, the system does verification. And in the future, say it's a server room. In the future, the system can tell itself that if it's a server room, it must have a firefighting system. So everything fits into place in one system, easy to use in our view. Or say doors. Using the code, you can tell that this is a part of the wall partition that separates server room from other rooms, and you cannot confuse it with a door between offices, for instance. Interoperability, that's another important aspect, because we cannot always select one vendor and deal with them. IsoLibre, for instance, plugin can be used, and it will work with the classes of its own, and such classes can be easily integrated into the system, and thus ensuring easy operation. So when we do all this, launch the pilot project, everything looks nice, but it turns out that it's not enough. Turns out that we forgot the classifiers that I mentioned before. So each class must have certain properties and certain characteristics. And this work is being done right now. We are doing this for our state client, and we are also holding negotiations with private customers who saw the potential of this information structuring system. This is not just a project in Kazakhstan. This is a project that we are now launching on CIS scale. There is a dedicated organization that deals with regulatory oversight of such initiatives, and we offered the system to them. And we also take into account the experience of Denmark and Sweden, who are much more advanced than we are on this. Right now, this process is a key discussion point with this organization. Right now, we are talking about translation of the classes, because sometimes it may sound funny to you, but ISO translations can be different when they're translated into Russian in Russia, Belarus and Kazakhstan, because there are different, well, types of Russian, and there may be different Russian translations of the same standard. So we want to have same standards that deal with information modeling, and we want to have a single translation for these standards with the same terms, the same language for the same concepts. There won't be any confusion. We will all be on the same page. We will all have a better understanding what properties and characteristics certain object must have. And then it's up to the producers and people dealing with economic activities, how they are going to integrate these codes in their business practices. But we already started it anyway. Since we are now shaping up this framework of large volume of information, it requires in-depth discussions, approbation, and that is why we need you, distinguished participants, because you have a vested interest in the development of this. Please join us in our efforts. There's a dedicated website, and you may have a closer look at and get to know the basic information better. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Please contact me or contact the use the contact info on the website, and we will be happy to work with you. Thank you for your attention.